Obviously, today we are talking about a helicopter crash that occurred here just outside of St. Louis yesterday, almost at about this time. It was, to my knowledge, two linemen were working down a transmission line when they clipped the line and it went down. In your former position with the NTSB, you would be on cases like this. When you get to that scene, what's the first thing that you're looking for?
When you look at a helicopter accident like this, and I still do that in my second career, if you will, I've investigated a number of power line strikes by aircraft that were being used by line technicians to either do maintenance and or put marking balls on power lines. The FAA requires certain lines to be marked and in certain places at different altitudes. It is a very, very prescribed and choreographed exercise because you are working in an environment. One, you're in a wire environment, but two, these power lines are still energized. And because they're energized, there are certain protocols that must be followed, not only by the line techs, but also by the pilot. And then again, it takes a lot of finesse as a pilot operating that closely to 100 kV line or thereabouts, because if that aircraft touches the line, unfortunately, disaster can and will happen.
If that aircraft does come in contact with the line, does it short out the electronics in that aircraft?
What it does when the helicopter pilot is hovering in close proximity to the line technician has what's called a wand or a hot stick. They put that hot stick on the line itself. One, it's to dissipate or discharge the high electrical path that's created. If they don't do that, then you could have the possibility of an electrical arc jumping to the helicopter, and because you have fuel tanks on that aircraft, it can cause an explosion. That's why it's so critical, especially as an investigator, to look at not only what the policies, procedures, and protocols were in use that day. What kind of training did the line tech have? What kind of training did the pilot have? How much experience did they have? Other than that, you're also looking at the environment. What was the weather like? Because again, trying to hover a helicopter within 3 to 4 feet of a high energy power line takes a lot of finesse. And if you have any kind of gusty wind condition, you could inadvertently get into that power line. Once that happens, if a skid or some other part of the helicopter touches that line or the rotor blade actually strikes the line, the aircraft will start to disintegrate. And of course, because of the fuel, it will cause an explosive type fire.
What do pilots have to have any type of specialized training to do this type of work?
Pilots who do this kind of work must have specialized training. This is not something that any kind of pilot or any helicopter pilot can just go out and do. It requires specialized training. You have to understand electricity. You have to understand the wire environment that you're going to be operating in. You have to be a very good judge of the weather conditions, because again, if you have any kind of gusty wind condition or strong wind, while yes, you can compensate with flying skills, you're only moving 3 or 4 feet. Your margins of safety are very limited. And again, if the aircraft moves up or down, left or right, and you didn't command it, but some environmental factor pushed the aircraft into the wires, there's just no way for a pilot to compensate for that once the strike has happened.
How does the NTSB essentially determine what happened in this situation where, did it, for my witnesses, this helicopter did explode, it came apart. How do they try and piece that together?
What they'll do is they'll, of course, gather all the available video, because there is some floating around on the internet. They'll look at that video. I always used video because it gave me, as an investigator, an actual picture rather than trying to get just a number of detailed facts out of a witness, because witnesses' recalls vary. And as time goes on and the story is told, the story unfortunately gets, inflated. It's like catching the fish. Yeah, I caught a fish. It was this big and it was really only a 6-inch minnow. So when you look at the information, the NTSB will gather witness information, video, and then they'll try and understand what the flight path of the aircraft was. In some cases, you can actually use radar or what's called ADS-B data. That will help the investigators determine what the actual flight path was, how long they may have been on station, what the movement of the aircraft was. And then, of course, they'll go back to whoever employed the pilot and the lineman, go back and look at their training, look at all of their skills. Did they have any previous events that may have contributed or caused this? What was their plan for that day? Because changing or performing maintenance on a line is a little different than just putting a marking ball on the line. It takes two different processes. All of that is very complex. Then, of course, you have to look at the helicopter, or what in this case is left of the helicopter on the barge. The post-crash fire consumed a lot of the aircraft. There is some telltale evidence that is available to the investigators to determine if everything that they can verify was operating normally, or was there an abnormal situation that caused the pilot to have to take other types of action. Those are the critical elements of the investigation for the investigators to determine so that they can put the sequence of events together.
Is this maybe one of the most dangerous jobs that you can have in the sky?
When you look at this type of operation, this is probably top three. Besides long line operation, where you have helicopters that have 100 or 200-foot long line below the helicopter, because those types of operations, you can, if you have a bucket or something from hanging from the long line, there's always the potential of getting it hung up in trees or buildings and things like that that could actually pull the aircraft out of the sky. The biggest thing here, no matter what kind of operation, is if there's a mechanical malfunction, especially with the engine on the helicopter, the pilot needs to immediately go into what is called auto rotation. Because the rotor blades are what are providing lift for the helicopter, in the event of abnormal engine operation or even failure, the pilot must immediately start a descent to keep the rotor system turning. That's why it'll be very critical that the investigators determine whether or not there was a mechanical malfunction or failure of the engine prior to this event. Was that the initiating factor, or was it something else?
This question, I'm not sure if you can answer for me or not, because it deals with more of the lineman side of it. How do they even train, that far up in the air? I've had quite a few family members that were linemen, and I can't remember, they talked about going up those 200 or 300-foot poles, but never anything like this.
When you do aerial line work like this, there is specialized training. So there is a bit of a ground school. That is, the lineman needs to know how the helicopter operates. They're typically sitting on a platform or on a skid plate so that they can access the line, because they can't be inside the aircraft trying to work on the line. So they're hooked. They have safety harnesses that are hooked to the helicopter that allow them to then go feet off or feet out of the helicopter, so that they can work on the line itself. It takes specialized, not only classroom type training, but then you go up and do practical training. So you're going to go up with an instructor or somebody that's got a lot of experience as a lineman, and you'll go practice. You'll get the pilot will hover in close proximity to a power line. The student, if you will then do all of the techniques that are necessary being coached by that senior person until they're confident that the line tech is current and qualified to be able to conduct whatever the mission was, whether it's maintenance on the line or putting marking balls on the line. But there is very specialized training for these types of operations.
How are incidents like this used to kind of shape the industry standard for safety?
When we look at any kind of accident, but especially accidents like this, it's important that we get the lessons learned. We've lost two people in this helicopter accident. It's a tragic circumstance, especially for the families, but we can't allow them to have died in vain. We have to look at those lessons learned. What can be learned? What can be put back into the industry, especially this part of the industry, so that we can train pilots better, give them better recognition skills. We can train line techs better so that they understand that they can only do this, but they can't do that. They must follow the protocols, because once you start to deviate from any kind of established policy or procedure, Now you're into basically no man's land. It's not tested. And you really set yourself up for a position of jeopardy. And that's why the investigation process is so critical in developing these types of facts, conditions, and circumstances.
Greg, that's all the questions I had. Was there anything that you would like to add, sir?
I think the biggest thing right now is for the investigative process to play out. And then again, whatever gets developed is taken seriously by the industry. And I know this, the industry does, because I work with a lot of folks that are helicopter operators. They do these kinds of operations, and they take everything seriously, just like firefighting accidents. Whenever we have an accident like that, there is always something to be learned. And while it won't bring these two folks back from this tragic circumstance, it will help the aviation industry. And again, line operations, helicopter operations in these types of environments, safety will be enhanced for sure.